Chapter 14 of The Midnight Passenger by Richard Henry Savage. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. Chapter 14. Irma Gluyas. It was 4 days after the sailing of the secret mission of justice when Witherspoon said adieu to Miss Alice Worthington at the 42nd Street station. With a wise forethought, the young lawyer had succeeded in his innocent ruse to distract attention. Mr. Lemuel Boardman not only called the young heiress back to Detroit for the probate of her father's will, but sent on his wife as a courtesy convoy to make sure of the girl wife's acquiescence. It was none too soon, for a haggard anxiety now drew lines upon the heiress's fair brow. News from the pursuers could only be expected in a fortnight, and Witherspoon feared the strain of a momentous secret upon the young beauty's nerves. Her soul longed for Randall Clayton's complete vindication. One hint and Ferris would surely take flight, mused Jack, and if there were accomplices, they are surely watching her every movement. And yet it was an ordeal, this parting. For the 100th time Witherspoon promised to come by the first train to Detroit with the tidings of the secret quest, and a score of times he was forced to deny Alice Worthington's tearful pleading. "Let me know to whom I can make restitution," she cried. "The will! Who has it? The beneficiary may sorely need poor Randall's strangely withheld fortune." "Only when justice is done will that claimant appear," firmly answered Witherspoon. "You trust me now with the handling of your fortune. Trust me yet a little longer with that secret. I will telegraph you of the success or failure of our expedition. And then all will be made plain to you when Atwater returns. There must be no failure of justice. We will repay the villains to the uttermost farthing." And, in his turn, Witherspoon was sorely baffled, for the sudden appointment of Mr. Arthur Ferris of New York as consul of the United States at Amoy, China, had been duly gazetted. Only to Stillwell did the eager Witherspoon confide his fears that one of the unpunished criminals was escaping in honorable guise. "You are in error, my boy," confidently answered the legal Solon. "We have had Ferris shadowed on behalf of the executors ever since the death of Hugh Worthington. The fact is," he said, lowering his voice confidentially, "Senator Dunham is at the helm in this thing. You well know that old Hugh and the Senator were closely allied. Now, Hugh blindly trusted Ferris, as the statesman's nephew, and, in fact, Ferris is, to a certain extent, a very dangerous customer for all of us. He had papers and secrets which might ruin his uncle, and a discovery of his hidden relations with Hugh would gravely affect our company's commanding position. Old Boardman has had a week of private conference with Senator Dunham. Boardman knew every secret of poor old Hugh's heart. Dunham and Boardman have gone over all the documents and matters surrendered by Ferris, and the Senator vouches for Ferris's future silence. He has himself set off $100,000 of our stock in Ferris's name, in escrow, as a guarantee of the young man's silence. This is a present to Ferris, who let Dunham have the first privately telegraphed news of Hugh's death. Why, sir, Dunham turned the market for $500,000 on that. It appears the daughter telegraphed the first news of the accident to Ferris at the old man's dying request, and Ferris cunningly held it back, so that the Associated Press did not get it for a day. Then came the panicky drop in our stock. Dunham sold huge blocks short, and filled later at the lowest notch, 40 points below. "I thought," slowly remarked Witherspoon, "that Ferris would perhaps try to blackmail the estate." "So he did," dryly answered Stillwell. "He gets $100,000 in clear settlement of all his claims for legal services for the past 5 years, as rendered to the Worthington estate." "Oh, I see," bitterly remarked Witherspoon. "Each side puts up $100,000 as the price of his silence." "And," curtly said Stillwell, "we now hold Dunham responsible that Ferris does not return to America for 4 years. By that time Dunham's senatorial term will be out. He will retire from politics, and so, his record and our interests are secure. I always feared that Ferris would turn up darkly in this sad murder business," gloomily added the old lawyer. "But the whole secret inquest so far proves me to the correctness of Boardman and Warner's judgment. Ferris feared Clayton's natural influence over the old man, and his own final game was the daughter's hand, and then the control of the old man's fortune. He spied on Clayton, lied about him, and at last brought about the estrangement of the old man and his only loyal servant in the whole circle. Poor Clayton! After his death he fell into a useless fortune. Miss Worthington has already made arrangements for a magnificent monument to him in the family plot at Detroit, and Randall Clayton will be there beside his stern old master. But for Ferris' wiles, Clayton would surely have married that noble girl, and been alive today, a happy man, in Detroit. Ferris played a bold game, and lost at last. It was the sale of the Senator's influence for the hand of the heiress, and now she hates him with an undying bitterness. But you can drop Ferris out as a suspected murderer. No, Clayton was evidently killed for the vast funds he carried. And we see, too late, that no less than 3 men should ever be trusted to make regular trips with such great amounts of money. But it's the old story of life. We are all wise a day after the fair. 10 days after the stout Rambler shook out her snowy sails and flirted away to Bermuda, there was nothing left to ruffle the still waters of oblivion which had closed over Randall Clayton. Only upon the face of Robert Wade, Esquire, lingered now an anxious expression of vague unrest. For the Newport Art Gallery knew the oily beauty of Mr. Adolph Lilienthal no longer. There was a new face behind the proprietor's desk, and the private view gallery was permanently closed. The furtive visitors came trooping in and went disconsolately away, for the private hall entrance was sternly shut and the electric bell removed. Night after night police, customs, and post office officials sat in secret conference over the mysterious threads of the Baltic smuggling conspiracy now being gathered up while Mr. Adolph Lilienthal languished in a private cell in Ludlow Street jail. He divided his ignorance of what he was in for with the frightened Ben Timmins, who was safely locked up in a lower tier of the same Human Safe Deposit Bureau, charged with complicity in smuggling. The affairs of Magdal's Pharmacy were being conducted by a new clerk, nominated by the police, all unknown to the Tenderloin habitués, and a service-paid detective occupied the private office where the secret connection between Lilienthal and the absent Mr. Fritz Braun was being daily traced out. The summer flowers were nodding over poor Randall Clayton's lonely grave, in the lonely cemetery of Woodlawn, on the September day when a queerly assorted party of tourists descended from the train in the little Silesian village of Schebitz. Dr. William Atwater was tenderly cautious of the comfort of a veiled invalid woman, at whose side a sturdy nurse aided the watchful medical attendant. And none of the gaping yokels of the town obtained even a glimpse of the sick woman's pale face, as she was conducted to the covered carriage in waiting for the train. With some show of state, a resplendent courier and a hard-featured military-looking stranger drove in advance of the carriage, half hidden in a hooded country drosky. The slanting summer showers glittered in the half-veiled sunbeams as the party hastily drove away toward the summer resort, 2 leagues away, where jaded fashionables rejoiced in the healing waters of the Louisianquella. But no one of the gaping throng following the Fremden guessed at the errand of this motley throng. In silence the cortege proceeded until a little by-lane covered with overhanging branches was reached, leading down into a dell where a natural vista showed an old gray mansion upon a rocky knoll. An untrimmed forest around still gave its shelter to bird and hare, starting out from their coverts as the carriages rolled over the grass-grown, deserted road. "It is a bleak house," murmured Atwater, gazing out of his carriage at the dreary crags of the Katzengebirge towering up, overhanging the neglected demesnes. The young doctor leaned over and then whispered a few words in the ear of the apparently invalid woman, who was now trembling like a leaf. "Remember, Leah," he sternly said, "your boy's life hangs on your faith now." Atwater moved a pistol holster around under his loose topcoat as the drosky in front of them halted. He sprang lightly out and walked to where the other 2 men were busied in an earnest colloquy. McNerney, pistol in hand, was gloomily gazing at the turrets of the gray house. "He may escape us," fiercely said the man who had traveled from New York, eager to clasp the cold steel on Mr. August Meyer's blood-stained hands. "Not so," calmly asserted the disguised Breslau police sergeant, a sturdy war veteran. "I have hunted here all over the Adler's Horst. I know every crag and open spot. My soldiers are now hidden in a circle all around the old house. The moment that our carriages drive out into the open, they will close in and arrest every living soul. Do you see that little white flag flying on a pole on that pile of rocks? That is my signal that all is ready. Come on now, we may not be in at the death." Atwater had marveled at the rapid work of the officials in their 3 hours' stay at Breslau. And now he admired the skirmishing tactics of the veteran as the three men dodged from side to side while the empty carriage slowly drove down into the open. The German sergeant threw up his hand and darted forward on the run as the lithe forms in rifle green were seen quickly swarming out of the woods encircling the old mansion. There was no sign of life in the low, irregular hunting lodge, save a pillar of smoke lazily ascending from the offices in the rear. McNerney was racing along at the German officer's side, his pistol drawn, and Atwater hardly turned his head as a squad of soldiers darted out of the encircling thickets. "He's in there!" shouted a corporal to the Breslau policemen, now eager to make the capture and share McNerney's promised reward. The screams of the frightened servants could be heard as the assailants neared the house. Was it fancy, or did McNerney see a grim, human face glaring out of the window of a round tower at the angle of the facade? "Here, this way!" cried McNerney, as he stumbled into a little garden where trellised grapevines in olden days made a shaded walk for the Lady of Adler's Horst. The group of men stopped aghast as a woman dashed wildly out of a door opening onto a long conservatory. Her voice rang out in a last appealing cry for help. She was sorely pressed. Not 3 paces behind her, trailing white robes, his face convulsed with passion, Fritz Braun leaped along, in a murderous rage, like a tiger in pursuit. In his right hand gleamed a flashing knife, and as the frantic woman tripped and fell, the brute's arm was raised. But throwing himself back into the gallery position, McNerney tossed his revolver at the point blank. The heavy crack of the pistol was followed by a yell of rage as the American sprang forward, planting his foot firmly on Fritz Braun's chest. Atwater had kicked the knife a score of yards away, when Sergeant Breyman thrust his burly form in front of the fallen woman. But McNerney was sternly covering the fallen form of Braun with his cocked pistol. "Move, you dog, and I'll blow your brains out," he shouted. "Here, Atwater, get the handcuffs out of my left coat pocket and clap them on this wretch." There were a half-dozen men now holding down the defiant murderer, whose right arm lay limply at his side. The second carriage had boldly driven across the lawn, and Leah Einstein leaped lightly to the ground. She was all unveiled now, and Irma Gluyas uttered a faint cry as the handsome Jewess stood spellbound before the astounded prisoner. Sergeant Breyman had already knotted a handkerchief around the prisoner's bleeding arm, when Dennis McNerney, in a ringing voice, cried, "August Meyer, alias Fritz Braun, I arrest you for the murder of Randall Clayton." With one shuddering sigh Irma Gluyas fell prostrate upon the grassy sward. "Take her into the house, men," cried the sergeant, as a score of hardy soldiers now closed around the excited group. "Go with them, Leah," said Atwater. "I'll just glance at the scoundrel's arm and then come in to you." When the riflemen bore the now fainting prisoner into the dreary granite-walled lodge, McNerney whispered to Atwater, "Look out for him. I must take the nurse and Leah and try to locate Braun's plunder. These Germans must never know of that." With all the formality of a marionette, Sergeant Breyman now posted his guard, leaving a corporal and 2 men with the young surgeon, for Atwater only lived now to see Braun dragged back to his punishment. There was no mistake, for McNerney had whispered, "It's the 6th Avenue druggist, sure enough. I'm a made man for life." A few household servants were being paraded and questioned by the German official, while Dennis McNerney, followed by Leah, glided through the rooms of the second story. A glance told the practical officer where Braun had made his own headquarters. The southwest bedroom and a second-story turret gave a full view of all the approaches to the Adler's Horst. Guns and sharpened hunting implements easily showed Braun's preparations for defense, and his presumed relaxation. When McNerney had glanced at Irma Gluyas' own retreat, he hastily locked the door of Braun's separate retreat. The policeman's quick eye had caught sight of the inner bolts and chains. The stuff is surely hidden near here. I must make my play upon his pretty companion. When McNerney joined Dr. Atwater, the physician had already left Braun to the formal questioning of the methodical sergeant. Irma Gluyas was now sobbing wildly, her head resting on the bosom of the woman who had been Braun's dupe as well as slave, the woman who had feebly enacted the role of Madame Raffoni. And now the whole frightful truth had dawned upon the beautiful Magyar. She gazed despairingly at McNerney, when he quickly said, "You can purchase your own safety. You can aid us now. Tell me, where did he hide the $250,000 he stole? For this scoundrel only did murder to reach the fortune carried by poor Clayton."
"Kill me, do what you will, I care not," sobbed the singer. "I knew nothing of these crimes, of either one. Hasten, though. Search well the second floor of the turret. This fiend spends all his evenings there alone. He always locked his rooms, and the door to the tower. Even the servants were not allowed to enter his den. What you seek must be there. May the curse of God reach him. And now is my hour of vengeance. He betrayed this poor victim, the man who died through a noble love for me."
Only Leah Einstein and the resolute Atwater remained at Irma's side as McNerney ran upstairs alone. The police matron, who had been Leah Einstein's secret jailer on the voyage, was now listening to Braun's stubborn negations of all Sergeant Breyman's formal questions. Atwater, with a touched heart, listened to Irma Gluyas in her passionate ravings.
"The lying fiend! I will tell all. I will go on my knees to pray to God to strike him dead."
For, at last, the duped woman knew that Randall Clayton was already cold in death when Braun had forged the lying telegram which bade her hope for deliverance.
"He watched me, night and day, lest I should try to escape. He plotted to kill me, but he feared the servants. I always kept the little peasant child here in my rooms, night and day. Our old forester, Hermann, who guards the estate for the young Count von Kinsky, who is traveling over the world for 4 years, is good and true. He is Frida's uncle, and I told him all my fears. I had only a few jewels, my own. Braun feared to give me money, but Hermann was arranging to help me away to Poland when you came. Once there, I would have been safe from Braun. He would not have dared to claim me. And Hermann, the forester, is known to all the officials. He is in charge of the estate. Braun feared him. He dared not take me away, for I would not go. It has been the slavery of hell itself, but I baffled him. 4 times a day Hermann came for my orders, and I always left a little light burning in one window of my rooms. Every night one of the men watched. My food was prepared by Frida alone, and she never left my side. Braun dared not poison me. I waited, and he waited. But what did he wait for?" "He waited for me," cried Leah Einstein, in a fit of remorseful tears, now anxious to save her boy. She seized Atwater's arm with trembling hands. "Your police detective did not get Braun's first letter to me. He begged me to come to him. He was to get rid of this poor girl, and I was to live like a lady." The 2 guilty women were weeping together when McNerney stole into the room. He drew the young doctor aside. "Our main work is done here," he whispered. "Now get these 2 women in trim so they will not tell anything to our German friends. You and I can handle this quest alone. I have found out his hiding place." While the matron delayed Sergeant Breyman below, Atwater and McNerney ascended to the murderer's lair. "I at once saw that the flagstones in the fireplace in the turret had been lifted," hoarsely whispered the overjoyed Dennis. "With this old boar spear I pried up the slabs. It's all down there, a valise full of notes. Here, help me drag this couch over the stones and move the furniture. The German police must not see this. Tonight you and I will gather up the harvest." The athletic young men worked with a will. In 5 minutes the panting McNerney said, safe enough now from the ox-eyed German detective, "Let us go down. How badly is he hurt?" "His right arm is merely disabled. It's a very severe flesh wound," complacently answered the doctor. "Just enough loss of blood and following inflammation to leave him as helpless as a lamb in our hands."
I want to take the wolf home, growled McNerney, and to see him sit in the chair of death. I'll give him no chance to play tricks. There was little sleep in the old schloss of Adlershorst on this eventful night. The regular pacing of sentinels re-echoed upon the porticos, and a squad of hearty German soldiers made merry in the servants' hall with the released domestics. Stout Oberfoster Hermann listened, with mouth agape, to Sergeant Breyman's loud denunciation of the wounded prisoner as the two men exchanged confidences in the dining hall, where antlers and wolves' heads, grinning bears' skulls, and eagles' wings told the tale of many a wild jagd. In the library, where Braun lay under guard, the two Americans were as powerless as Sergeant Breyman to break down Fritz Braun's dogged reserve. The only growl which escaped his bearded lips was a muttered curse. "Damn you both! In 5 minutes I would have silenced that lying jade's tongue forever." It was 4 days after the surprise of Adlershorst when the strangers left the estate to the care of rugged old Forster Hermann. Far and near, the simple country folk came to gaze upon the Amerikanische desperado as the cortege of 3 carriages and 2 wagons drew slowly away from the schloss. The soldiery had now all departed, save a corporal and 3 men, and peace reigned over the woods given up again to the elk and roebuck. Atwater and McNerney were astonished at Fritz Braun's stolid indifference. The whole drama was now laid bare up to the fatal moment when the entrapped Clayton was left helpless under Braun's strangling fingers. The news of the capture, cabled over to New York City, had sent Jack Witherspoon whirling away to Detroit to give to Alice Worthington the news of the very successful capture and approximate vengeance for Clayton's murder. Braun's defiant mood still continued. The only request he had made of the 2 friends was that he might have the necessary clothing for his homeward voyage. With keen eyes McNerney and Atwater searched all the articles reserved for the use of the sullen wretch, whose inflamed wound now rendered him almost helpless. The whole crime seemed to be now cleared up from the frank confessions of Leah Einstein and the unknown Magyar beauty. "It has been a great campaign," said McNerney, as he saw Braun, guarded by 4 soldiers, start slowly toward the village under the convoy of Sergeant Breyman. "He spent but little of the plunder. Here we have recovered nearly $255,000 in bills and good checks. He evidently feared to attract attention by any undue luxury." They had removed every scrap of the belongings of both the fugitives. "I can understand this wretched Leah now," said Atwater. "She would have been Braun's willing tool in hiding his final murder of Irma Gluyas. Braun needed her aid, and would have given her the slave's dole of comfort. But this beautiful wanderer, she hails with delight her return to America. Is it her frank desire for vengeance? She had learned to love poor Clayton, and her whole soul is fixed on Braun's expiating the murder. Prison she fears not." Neither man knew of the singer's fear lest an Austrian dungeon might open its iron cells to her should Braun be discovered to be the fugitive Hugo Landor. "No one can read a woman's heart," mused McNerney. "Judges and juries, the journals and the public, fancy these poor wretches, hunted down for their beauty, are indifferent from their more fortunate sisters. I've not found it so. There's some womanhood left in every one of them, and there are manifold temptations and weaknesses in the lives of many who walk serenely in honor. At the last, all men and women are much the same, only, once started on the downward path, not 1 in 1,000 ever is checked. This Irma is not such a bad woman. With a better chance she might have been some one's heart darling for all time. The only thing I cannot see is how Braun killed this man so quietly." Both of the friends had discerned no more than the final trap, the fatal lure of Irma Gluyas' beauty. Braun, at the last becoming distrustful of the woman whose heart was rebaptized in love, had acted on the moment, and his crafty advantage was taken of Clayton's headlong passion. "It is clear poor Leah was only used as a stool pigeon. She is far too cowardly to harm the meanest creature," said Atwater. "In some way, Braun must have given Clayton a stupefying poison, and then strangled him. In that lonely place he undoubtedly hid the body and had it thrown overboard later. Of course, It was probably hidden in some case or box, perhaps a great trunk, and then cast into the bay by others. One thing is sure, we will never know from this brute's confession. He will die mute." "You're right," said McNerney, "for he will go grimly silent to the chair, a thug and a murderer, in heart and soul. This fellow could have prospered in any decent line of life. He is only one more to make the bitter discovery that crime does not pay. It is both stupid and useless, but the criminal only finds this hard truth out too late. He will never get away from me, alive or dead, and back he goes to New York." And yet McNerney forgot his keenest daily precautions, deceived by the apparent helplessness of the wounded murderer. The strangely assorted party were hurried through Breslau by the authorities, and Sergeant Breyman proudly wore Doctor Atwater's gold reporter as a parting present, when the train rushed away, bearing the secretly raging criminal back to a shameful death. "I shall not sleep till I get that fellow safely in an iron tank stateroom on the Hamburg steamer," said the stern-eyed McNerney, preparing to lock Braun's wrists to his own. "After we sail, we can have him watched, night and day. Then you and I can rest." The secret of the vast money recovery had been faithfully kept, and even when the first Bismarck turned the Lizard and sped out on the Atlantic, few of the passengers suspected that a daring criminal was imprisoned below. While Doctor Atwater keenly watched the bewitching Irma Gluyas and the now happy Leah, the returning tourists supposed them to be only a lady of rank and her waiting woman. McNerney, sure of his princely reward, now never left his prisoner, and the recovered funds were duly locked in the liner's great steel steamer safe. So it was left to William Atwater to draw out, bit by bit, the whole story of Irma Gluyas' wasted life. A pale-faced, stately beauty, steadfast and silent, was the wretched woman who had innocently lured Clayton to the murder chamber. It was easy for Atwater, in his professional experience, to discover from the final unbosoming of both the women that Braun had artfully drugged and stupefied his beautiful decoy, so that she was incapable of warning Clayton or interrupting the leisurely disposition of the murdered man's body. "He must have changed his first plans," mused Atwater, "only guided by his desire to have the money so imprudently trusted to one man." There was life in Leah Einstein's heart once more, for she now knew that her graceless son was probably safe from prison. Sly, secretive, and slavishly devoted to the young reprobate, the sin-soiled woman had successfully hidden all which could in any way implicate the dishonest office boy. When the great ship neared Sandy Hook, William Atwater frankly answered Irma Gluyas' wailing cry. "Why do I not throw myself over there, in search of peace?" For the gnawing of conscience had made the Magyar girl's life a torment. "It is not for me to judge you. It is only for me to help you," sadly said the young physician. "You have aided to bring many sorrows and sufferings on others. Work out your own salvation. You were born a Catholic. Your religion has orders where repentant women can toil among the suffering in schools or in hospitals. It has great work among the helpless. Hide your dangerous beauty there, among those who give their lives up to do good works. And you will find peace and hope stealing to your side. God gave you a life. You have no right to throw it away." The poor, repentant soiled one seized his hand and kissed it, while bitter tears rained from her eyes. "I will work. I will go where I cannot be hunted into a deeper hell than my accusing conscience brings up." There was a grim vigilance in every movement of Dennis McNerney as he watched the now haggard-eyed Braun in the tank cell far below the decks, where Fashion's children gaily chattered. Only a few gruff sentences had ever escaped the murderer on the long voyage, and only a horrible curse had answered the proposition of Atwater and McNerney that a full confession might, in some way, soften the brute's impending doom. The room where Braun was confined was bare of all lethal implements with which he might effect a suicide, and 2 stalwart men were his roommates. When the quartermasters, at midnight, peered out for the first glimpse of Fire Island light, Dennis McNerney, pacing the deserted deck, almost alone, revolved his plan of inspecting the sullen prisoner at intervals of every 3 hours during the night. "It is a desperate human brute, that one. muttered the sturdy policeman. "But I brought him safely home." While the wild coast storm raged, and the screaming gulls circled around the plunging ship, while shrill winds moaned in the steel rigging, McNerney crept down for the last time before sighting land, at 4 o'clock, to peer through the grated door and see Fritz Braun lying prone, a confused heap, his coat rolled up as a pillow under his head. The wounded arm alone was free. The other, shackled to a broad belt, was locked around the prisoner's waist. "He's sleeping like a child," mused the officer. "In a few hours he will be safely in the Tombs, and my long watch will be over." The great liner was grandly sweeping up to quarantine when Dennis McNerney leaped from his berth and followed the startled cabin boy, who shook him roughly. "Come down, sir! There's something wrong!" the boy babbled. "Get Doctor Atwater instantly!" cried McNerney as he rushed down to the ship's hold. One glance at the guarded door was sufficient. One of the careless keepers was clamoring for admittance, while the other bent over a rigid form lying there, prone and ghastly, in the gray morning light stealing in at the little porthole. "It happened while I was out at breakfast," pleaded the unfaithful watcher, whom McNerney roughly cast aside. Atwater was at McNerney's elbow when the frightened inmate had unlocked the door of the strong room. One shake of the recumbent form told the story. "He has cheated the executioner," solemnly said Atwater, letting the lifeless hand fall heavily from his grasp. "He lay that way all the while since your last visit," said the sullen derelict keeper. A hasty search of the cell showed an empty vial. "Chloral! Here is the key to the mystery!" cried Atwater, examining the coat, flung aside when the body was lifted. "See this torn sleeve? The murderer has hidden the bottle of poison here in the thick breast wadding of the coat under the coat sleeve. He waited coolly for the deed till the last night before our landing." Atwater again inhaled the odor of the narcotic. "Chloral, sure enough," he slowly said. "A 2-ounce vial, and probably mingled with some more deadly poison. Probably the knockout drops the wretch used formerly to peddle to convicts." An hour later a circle of astonished police officials stood around the corpse of the crafty criminal, who had passed beyond man's jurisdiction. "A desperate wretch," said the chief of detectives. "Fritz Braun, the mysterious druggist. He was prepared for the worst." With a quick sagacity, Doctor Atwater had concealed the press news of the desperate wretch's suicide, having in mind the final punishment of Lilienthal and Timmins. It was decided by the police officials to keep the news of the recovery of the fortune an official secret until all the crafty Baltic smuggling gang should all be apprehended. In Irma Gluyas' cabin, Leah Einstein had divulged the whole details of the cowardly crime as she had worked them out. It was to Doctor Atwater alone that Leah freely unbosomed herself. In return for the doctor's pledge, now given, to save the precocious Emil, the timorous Leah gave out the vital keynotes of the Baltic smugglers' syndicate. For, at last, the ban of fear was lifted, and the frightened woman made haste to avail herself of the official clemency offered by the authorities. A half-dozen policemen sped away in concert with United States deputy marshals for the arrest of a clan of steamship clerks, stewards, Hoboken hotel keepers, wharf officials, and others who had been the tools of the robust-minded Fritz Braun. There was a happy meeting with Miss Alice Worthington, who was now seated in Atwater's stateroom, under the care of the triumphant Jack Witherspoon. The cable had called her from her princely Detroit home to be the first to hear the whole story of the capture of Braun from the lips of Atwater and the jubilant Dennis McNerney. McNerney's triumph had been sadly dashed by the successful suicide of the great criminal. "Never mind," kindly said the chief of police. "It was not your fault. This makes you a sergeant, Dennis." The happy officer's eyes glistened as he saluted. And 10 minutes later he knew from the rosy lips of the great heiress that the full reward of $25,000 given by the company, and the same by Miss Worthington, was now payable to him on the deposit of the recovered funds and checks with the Western Trading Company. "5,000 of this is yours, Jim," cordially cried Dennis to Officer Condon, who had reported on board to announce the well-being of the office boy prisoner on the yacht Rambler. "I'll take another job of cobbler work like that, any time," joyously answered Condon. And, mind you, I'm to be the best man at the wedding." For Dennis McNerney's new rank and fortune were to be the immediate cause of his precipitating a hitherto delayed matrimony. The craft with which Fritz Braun had hidden away the poison in the padded coat lining suggested to all the insiders the manner in which he intended to use to rid himself of the repentant and defiant Irma. While the chief of police arranged for the secret removal of Fritz Braun's body at night, there was an earnest conference in Atwater's stateroom. "I leave it to you, my brothers," she said with a pretty blush, "to arrange for the complete rehabilitation of Randall Clayton's memory. The whole business world must know that he was led to his grave by an honorable affection, and that the momentary imprudence which caused him to fall into Braun's trap was the only indiscretion of his whole career. And now, I have a right to demand of you both the name of my dead foster brother's heir. The $1,000,000 paid for the poor boy's half of the Detroit lands is on deposit in the railway company's safes, awaiting the probate of his will." "He stands before you," gravely said Doctor Atwater, taking her hand. "Poor Randall. Some premonition of his doom haunted him. He had saved some money, and by investments accumulated a little purse of $20,000 or so. And this, and all his estate, he willed to Mr. Witherspoon, as a wedding present for Francine Delacroix." "Why did you not tell me sooner?" reproachfully demanded the heiress, turning her lovely eyes upon Witherspoon. "Because I wished to freely aid in running down his murderers, to clear his memory, and because the great world would have misinterpreted my zeal. I know the nobility of heart with which your father set aside this property for Clayton, as soon as he found out the old title. Had they met at Cheyenne, all would have been well." And then Alice Worthington thanked God in her anxious heart that her dangerous secret was safe. She smiled through her happy tears as she placed her hand in Witherspoon's. "We will both cherish his memory, for life. And now I only exact one condition. That is, that Francine's wedding shall be from my home. We were schoolmates and sisters of the heart, though our home was a very quiet one. My father was averse to all family intimacies. The executors are ready to make the transfer of the money whenever you prove up poor Randall's will." "And I," said Witherspoon, "exact one thing in return. I demand the right, in honor, to refund to the trading company all the money used by the murderer, the whole search expenses, and the double rewards. There will be a princely fortune left for me after all, and this money so used will vindicate poor Clayton's memory from all blame for his chivalric folly." Alice Worthington bowed her head in assent, as the spirited young man proceeded. "When you see Irma Gluyas, you will know what a strange fate overtook him, for she has been made another woman by the manly love of the poor fellow who believed in her." The Detroit lawyer was deceived by the heiress's calmness. "She knew nothing," he mused. "It is well." While Atwater busied himself in the removal of the two women who had been Fritz Braun's dupes, and arranged for young Einstein's meeting with his mother and recording the joint confessions of the two, a surprise awaited Officer Dennis McNerney. The cabin boy who had been allowed to bring meals to the wounded prisoner, in fear and trembling, confessed to the baffled policeman that Braun had given him $100 bill which he had managed to secrete in his trousers waistband for the promised duty of writing to Mrs. August Landor of No. 195 Ringstrasse, Vienna, that her fugitive son, Hugo Landor, had died of a fever in a Catholic hospital at San Francisco under an assumed name. The men on watch were all ignorant of German, and so did not detect the last wishes of the intending suicide. "But I knew nothing," protested the boy. "I was always freely allowed to serve him, and so I brought him a scissors and needle and thread to repair his clothing, which had been cut to accommodate his arm. I thought that his little bottle was only medicine, for he hid it in his hand, after opening the breast of his coat." "And so there was one last touch of feeling left in the murderer's heart," mused the stout policeman. "He wished his poor old mother to believe that he died decently. Let it be so. She shall not carry this last shame to her grave. And now, to polish off all the underlings of the smuggling conspiracy, there is both honor and profit in bringing them to book. Timmins and Lilienthal may be useful as state's evidence, for this last fellow saves his neck, perhaps, by Fritz Braun's death. It can never be known if he was only Braun's tool or the real inspirer of the crime. He must have found out about the money. And so the careful lying of mother and son hid forever the reason of Braun's plot. The boy was saved. When the stars of night shone down upon the great ship at her dock all signs of the gloomy happenings had been carefully hidden. Dr. Atwater had removed the two women, under guard of the well-rewarded matron and a skilled detective, to his own apartments, where the crafty Emil Einstein was brought to meet his poor, doting mother. The detective captain took charge of the unraveling of the whole story of Mr. August Meyer's Brooklyn career, as well as the secrets of the crafty druggist, Fritz Braun. There was a great symposium at Councillor Stillwell's residence by the leafy borders of the park. The great advocate rejoiced at the removal of every stain from Clayton's memory, and marveled greatly at the deeply laid snares of the man whose body now lay unhonored at the morgue. "You will have to run the company's affairs all alone for a month," cheerfully said Jack Witherspoon, "for Atwater and I are to accompany Miss Worthington out to Detroit. Only I bid you all now to my wedding, which will occur in 6 months, and Miss Worthington honors my Francine with throwing her home open for that quiet ceremony. Atwater is to be the best man." "Where is your reward?" softly said Miss Worthington to the faithful young physician as they looked out on the evening stars together. "I can wait," simply said the young man, and their eyes dropped in a strange confusion. But Alice Worthington was in her mind already wondering when the weary weeks would pass away and free her from the tie binding her to the man secretly banished to Amoy. Chapter 15. of The Midnight Passenger by Richard Henry Savage. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. Miss Worthington Shares Her Secret. The time of roses had come and gone once more. The woodland was turning to gold again, around the beautiful country home of that successful capitalist, Mr. John Witherspoon, at Fordham. All the world knew of the stately glories of that recent wedding festivity at Detroit, whereat, under the wedding bell of white blossoms, Miss Francine Delacroix had given her hand to the man whom all envied as he stood before them, the active, intellectual champion of Miss Alice Worthington. The serene countenance of the young millionairess was placid, bearing a dignity far beyond her years, when she marshaled the friends of her youth to witness the marriage of the man whose skillful hand now guided the vast eastern interests of the Worthington estate. It was only after the bewildering honeymoon days had passed that Witherspoon, under the advice of Councillor Stillwell and the astute executors, began to gather up all the loose ends of the Clayton affair. The permanent residence of Witherspoon in New York City was exacted by the growing cares of the vast company's interests. And so the young bridegroom had selected a temporary country house until his vivacious helpmeet could be pleased in a choice of their permanent city residence. Unchanged by the possession of his dead friend's fortune, so romantically passed down to him, Witherspoon ceased to try to unravel the dark complications of Hugh Worthington's past. There seemed to be some peculiar restraining influence which sealed the lips of Messrs. Boardman and Warner, and even the great Stillwell but briefly referred to the strange compact with Ferris, which had seemed to buy the crafty schemer's silence for $100,000. To the astonishment of proud old Detroit, Miss Worthington seemed to show no desire to open her superb palace home to society, and the great world slowly crystallized to the conclusion that she had found a new field in the affairs of the vast estate now absolutely under her control. The beautiful girl seemed to have passed, with a bound, into a mature womanhood, as if some malign influence had swept away all the flowers from her path. And, in her daily walks, she avoided the scores of gallants who now sought that richly dowered hand. "This is not as it should be," finally decided Witherspoon, whose firm hand had cleared up all the aftermath of complications arising from Clayton's murder. Busied with his own affairs, Witherspoon had left the fate of Irma Gluyas, the friendless Leah, and the corrupted boy to Dr. William Atwater, whose frequent visits to Detroit were explained by some vague plan of philanthropic deeds now occupying the mind of Miss Worthington. The meaner subordinates of Fritz Braun's crime were all easily disposed of, for both Lilienthal and Timmins were now serving long sentences for defrauding the United States customs laws. And the Newport Art Gallery and the Magdal's Pharmacy were now both matters of ancient history. A mock auction allured the crowd where the drug store had long gathered the degenerates, and a gaudy bargain bazaar flourished where once Lilienthal's inviting smile had wooed the unwary. And, as the pernicious smuggling gang had been routed, smitten hip and thigh, Witherspoon ceased to pry into the still partly veiled past. It was only after Sergeant Dennis McNerney had dropped the very last clue that Witherspoon finally abandoned his settled purpose of tracing down Arthur Ferris's supposed connection with the crime which swept Randall Clayton out of the world. "It's no use, sir," muttered the sergeant. "He was capable of anything, but he stands clear of the whole thing." The preposterous sergeant had sifted to the very dregs the fullest confessions of the passionate-hearted Hungarian beauty and the defenseless Leah. The complete history of August Meyer in Brooklyn had been traced out, and McNerney triumphantly demonstrated the uselessness of further search in 192 Layte Street. The old mansion had been in every way changed, and the basement was now the abode of swarming celestials who had tinkered its space up to suit themselves. There were no traces of the crime left. And so, reluctantly, Manager Witherspoon ceased to pry into the private life of Arthur Ferris. McNerney stoutly maintained the thesis to the last, that Ferris and Fritz Braun were strangers. "The women both prove it," urged the officer. And yet some still unfathomed game of Ferris made him Clayton's secret enemy. Ferris wanted that beautiful heiress. He wanted to completely estrange and supplant Clayton, and so to reach old Worthington's millions. For that, he clung to the unsuspecting comrade of his bachelor life. Look to the West for light in this. Believe me, if anyone knows, it's Miss Worthington. She is one woman in a million, a woman who does not talk. "What do you mean, Dennis?" sharply said the young lawyer. The simple policeman stoutly answered, "I observed that Miss Alice seemed to have gained a great mastery over Counselor Stillwell and her Detroit lawyers. She was with her father for hours before he died, and I'm of the opinion that he told her many things that none of the lawyers even dream of, secrets that perhaps even you do not suspect. I'm only a plain policeman, yet strange schemes are in these millionaires' heads often. The great man had his own private use for Ferris, and for the senator uncle. Who knows what great designs ended with his death? Believe me, she is following out her father's last advice, and if she lets Ferris off easy, you must do the same. As for Fritz Braun, he at first only intended, evidently, to lure poor Clayton into the art gallery or his own drug store, through this pretty Hungarian, and, from a study of Clayton's habits, change the valises and so rob him by the old trick, the bunco game. But fortune willed otherwise, and Braun took the chance of Clayton's faith in the girl. He did not know that Clayton was so fondly devoted to the woman. The murder was a sudden inspiration, arising from Clayton's headlong imprudence. And Braun knew nothing of old Worthington's designs, nor Clayton's past history. What more Miss Worthington may know, you will never know, much as she esteems you, until she wills. For she is a very resolute character, and I believe that she is quietly managing Stillwell and the other lawyers in her own way. It's clear to me that both Ferris and Braun used this poor office boy as a spy on Clayton, only for different purposes. As for the two women, they were both mere puppets. Fritz Braun was tempted by the unprotected situation of that vast sum of money going daily to the bank. He easily learned that from the boy's braggadocio talk, and then used the whole circle as a means to entrap Clayton. As for the women, they are both merely what temptation, misery, and surroundings have made them. I'm glad to hear Dr. Atwater say Miss Worthington has some plans for their future. As for the boy, your own design is a wise one. Transport him out west, give him a fair start in some Pacific state in a decent business, and then, if he goes wrong, after his severe lesson, let him run up against a smart punishment." Reluctantly convinced, John Witherspoon dropped all his final investigations as to Arthur Ferris's secret career in New York City. As the months rolled along he saw the justice of the blunt police officer's judgment, for Miss Alice Worthington seemed to be an administrating talent of the highest order. "She would make a Secretary of the Treasury, sir," said the admiring Stillwell. "She's old beyond her years, a rare woman." By some vague influence the personal future designs of Miss Worthington seemed to be a subject tabooed between Witherspoon, his wife, and Doctor Atwater, at the regular weekly dinner at Beechwood, where the young physician was always a stated guest. Miss Worthington, already a Lady Bountiful in Detroit, conducted a separate correspondence with the young wife, the husband, and the physician, the last her only confidant in the still unmatured plans of a practical philanthropy. It was in the early autumn of the year following Randall Clayton's death that Witherspoon sprang up in astonishment when he unfolded the New York Herald over his morning coffee at Beechwood. The cabled announcement of the death of the Honorable Arthur Ferris, United States Consul at Amoy, China, was only supplanted by the statement that he had fallen victim to the coast fever. "This is the end of all," sadly mused the lawyer, as he saw his immediate duty of reporting the news by telegraph to Detroit. "Whatever connection Ferris had with the secret designs of Worthington is now a sealed mystery forever. The hand of death has turned the last page down." Witherspoon rightly conjectured that to Senator Dunham the death of his once trusted negotiator would be a welcome release from the tyranny of a dangerous past. "The statesman's immaculate toga is still unsmirched," bitterly commented Witherspoon. "And now all of Arthur Ferris's busy schemes have come to naught. His bootless treason, his fruitless intrigue of years, even the hush money on the one side, the blood money on the other, are all alike valueless. He lost every trick in life, even with the cards in his own hands." It was a case of the engineer hoist with his own petard. In vain did Jack Witherspoon await any personal comment from the great heiress. The very name of the dead man was unmentioned in the daily letters from her secretary. When Doctor Atwater returned from one of his now frequent business visits to Detroit, he shook his head in grave negation when Witherspoon brought up the name of the dead consul. "Something very strange there. Even Boardman and Warner seem averse to any conversation on the subject," soberly said Atwater. "I judge that the memory of Ferris is a most distasteful topic to them all. I presume that the papers of old Hugh probably have revived matters, which might as well have been buried in Ferris's lonely grave out there on the shores of the Formosa Strait." It was nearly 2 months after the cabled announcement when John Witherspoon received a bulky packet from the United States Vice Consul at Amoy, China. He had not fully deciphered all the documents when he sprang from his chair and, quitting the Trading Company's office, hurriedly drove to Doctor Atwater's headquarters. Atwater saw from his friend's face that something of moment had happened. "Tell me, Jack, what is it?" he answered with a horrible fear. "Alice?" Witherspoon smiled sadly, as his friend's excitement betrayed the innocent secret of the young physician's heart. "No, God be praised," he slowly answered. "Alice lives to bless some good man's life. But I have here a message from the dead, and the last legacy of a crime. You must go out instantly to Detroit, for I cannot leave our great interests at this juncture. It seems as if the very grave had opened for this." Doctor Atwater's eyes were dim when he handed the papers back to his friend. What could have goaded him on to his unhappy end? What stings and whiplashes of conscience? Let us go carefully over the whole matter together. I will telegraph my departure and then take tonight's train. The few lines traced by Arthur Ferris's feeble fingers were supplemented by a long and formal letter from the United States Vice Consul at Amoy. The enclosure of a verified copy of the will of Arthur Ferris, duly attested by the consular seal, was accompanied by a statement that the original and the keys of Ferris's safe deposit box in New York had been duly forwarded to New York through the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. There was a sealed enclosure directed to Miss Alice Worthington, the superscription being faintly discernible in the trembling hand of the fevered patient. As both men gazed silently at each other, they knew that some dark secret lay veiled there under the outspread wings of the American eagle of the consular seal, which duplicated Ferris's private signet. With a strange interest Atwater read the last sufferings of the unfortunate official. My late superior seemed to be tortured in his mind to his very last moment," wrote the vice consul, "by the fear that these documents might not safely reach Miss Worthington through you. Be pleased to give me the earliest possible acknowledgment of the receipt of both the certified copy herewith sent and the original with the keys and duly certified order for the delivery of the tin box of the deceased to Miss Worthington herself." "Here we dismiss his memory forever between us," solemnly said Witherspoon, as he read aloud Arthur Ferris's last message. "It is for her alone to bear him in mind, and to sit in judgment upon him. What unrighted wrong drove him, in remorse, to his lonely grave? I shall never ask an answer of her." In vain did Atwater follow the enigmatic sentences. "I leave the fund of $100,000, created for me by my uncle, and the similar sum now due and payable by the Worthington estate, to Alice Worthington, for the foundation of such a charity as she may deem proper. This money is the legacy of a crime and of a wrong. Of a crime, though only contemplated, of which I am not innocent at heart, and of a wrong done, of which Miss Worthington alone shall be the judge. To you, Witherspoon, I can say that every mad scheme which I framed to reach wealth and power has failed miserably. That I have found my soul's unhappiness in the betrayal of poor Clayton's friendship. And yet, as I hope for the forgiveness of an Almighty God, I know nothing of his murder, either in the deed or its conception. Let me be forgotten by all the world, forgiven by one alone." The two friends long gazed at each other in gloomy silence. "I leave the whole mystery to you, my friend," at last wearily said the lawyer. "I will never try to read between the lines. Take the whole correspondence with you. I have already had a copy made of the vice consul's letter and Ferris's own few sentences. I know that Alice will surely consecrate this vile money to some good purpose, and so I make you my ambassador. She will understand why I hope never to hear Ferris's name again, for I know and feel that he was a murderer at heart. Had Clayton missed the snares of the deadly thug who coveted the money which was so criminally exposed, for the golden bribe of the Worthington fortune, Ferris would have sacrificed the only man who stood between him and the millionaire's favor, between him and, perhaps, this orphan girl's hand. And, as sure as the sinner's heir, so sure is the old proverb, the wages of sin is death. I will simply forward any further Amoy enclosures to Miss Worthington for her own action. The drama is done, the curtain has fallen, and the lights are turned out forever." Mr. and Mrs. John Witherspoon were enjoying the delights of a continental run a year later, when that bright-eyed young matron, Madame Francine, read to her delighted husband the account given by Miss Worthington of the opening of the Free Hospital and Orphans' Home, to which the young heiress had dedicated the estate of the unfortunate Ferris, as well as a large sum set aside by herself. The Witherspoons were in the far Niente, floating on the Grand Canal in beautiful Venice, when the young beauty selected Alice's letter from a sheaf handed to them by the porter of the Hotel Danieli, who pursued them in a gondola. The married lovers were now on their way to the Nile and the eternal glow of its cloudless skies. Witherspoon listened with mock gravity until he suddenly interrupted. "What does she say of Atwater?" "Nothing," answered the merry matron. "It's all about the grand opening of the home." "Then it's all right," calmly answered Jack, lighting a cigar and leaning back under the party-colored awning. "When a woman says nothing about a man, it's surely all right. I can wait patiently, till her philanthropic fever abates. I suppose that we will hear something at the first cataract, or at Khartoum, or some other remote spot, possibly where the lion basks upon the tomb of the ruined Palmyra. There is a happy crisis approaching, in the near future, as the swell journals say." There were many interesting details lost to the runaway lovers by their wanderings, but the essential facts finally reached them in Calcutta, on their homeward way around the world. Neither Alice Worthington nor the man who was now her coadjutor in many noble works could ever exactly recall the sequence of the events which had prolonged indefinitely Atwater's stay in Detroit. But it happened upon a winter evening, when the great Worthington mansion was silent, and Mrs. Hayward, Alice's duenna and general almoner, had artfully stolen away, leaving the unconscious lovers together. The successful working of the hospital and home was now assured beyond doubt. Atwater, gazing out into the glowing embers of the great fireplace, slowly said, as the musical chime of the silver bells of the mantel clock sounded 10: "And now I feel that Messrs. Boardman and Warner can oversee your local medical board and keep the institution from lapsing into the dry rot of a purely charitable organization." "I fear for nothing," he said, smiling faintly, "as long as you are here to watch it. And," he hastily added, "certainly you can trust Irma Gluyas. That poor woman finds a fiery zeal from her past sorrows spurring her on. She is a faithful assistant manageress. And even Leah Einstein has her humble merit as a sterling housekeeper. But you must have Jack carefully watch over that boy out in the West. Young Emil needs a firm hand, and only Witherspoon can hold him down to usefulness." "Why are you telling me all these things?" suddenly said Alice Worthington, her cheeks paling in a strange dismay. "Because," the young man said slowly, "I have long desired to follow out a special line of medical investigation in Vienna. I have the 2 years yet before I reach 30, in which I propose to make my mark in original research, or else return to New York to my old routine, fortified by the contact of the ablest medical minds in the world." "That is impossible! You shall not go!" suddenly cried Alice Worthington, with pallid cheeks aflame with sudden blushes. Her bosom was heaving in some strange tumult as Atwater took her trembling hands in his own. "It would be so hard for me to say good bye," he almost whispered, "that I have decided to write you from New York. I have already secured my passage on the Paris." "And you will not allow me to recompense you for all you have done?" whispered Alice, bravely struggling to keep back her tears. "Yes, I will," resolutely answered Atwater. "Go on lifting up the lowly. Bind up their bruised hearts, and all good men will bless your name. That will be my reward." "Wait a moment," faltered Alice, as she sped away. Left alone in the room, Atwater, gazing into the fire, listened for the returning footfall of the woman whose face had long haunted his pillow. "You alone, of all the world," said the beautiful woman as she glided to his side. "You alone are entitled to my confidence. Only you should know the story of my life." She handed him the letter which had been Arthur Ferris' eternal farewell to the woman who had never even borne his name. He started forward, with arms extended, as he read that last message from beyond the sea. "It means that I am to keep your innocent secret." "There is nothing hidden now," the loving woman shyly said. "It means that you are not to go." They were still tranced there in their happiness when the silver bells chimed out again. The ruddy firelight lit up their faces, glowing with the hidden love which had at last found its voice as the shadow of parting fell upon them. "Auf Wiedersehen, dearest heart," cried Atwater. "We will lead the noble life together, please God, to the end." "Hand in hand, and heart to heart," whispered the loving woman, whose happy eyes saw no cloud of the past now lowering upon her. And, even in the flush of the new-born joy she was true to her solemn vow. "No shame rests upon my Father's name," she murmured that night in her prayers. "The works that men do live after them, and in His name I will build up a monument of good works over the tomb where the secret of his life's temptation lies buried with him." The gleaming stars shone down tenderly upon the happy lover speeding homeward, for the bells of joy were ringing in his awakened heart. "I must try and get these glad tidings to our wanderers abroad," mused Atwater. And this, stripped of some merely personal happenings, with a gracious confirmation by Alice, was the budget of good news which greeted the Witherspoons on their arrival at Calcutta.
"Jack!"
joyously cried Madame Francine. "I have only been waiting for this official confirmation for some months. Alice writes me to hasten back so as to be the star guest of the coming wedding." "I have had a firm faith also," dryly rejoined her husband, "that in due time Alice's field of philanthropy would enlarge itself to include our friend. And so, it's all well that ends well. Here's for home, then, when you will." End of Chapter 15. And end of The Midnight Passenger, by Richard Henry Savage. Read by Mary Ann Spiegel. Chicago, Illinois, April 2011.